Okay, I am noticing now that I put the wrong date on here. So that is the only error in this. I'm going to try and record this. Give me 1 second. Set this all up, try and make sure it works. Okay, good. It looks like it's working, except for the date. A little closer. Okay, perfect. Thank you very much for coming out. I certainly would like to thank your group here in Portland for organizing this event. I would definitely like to thank my partner colleagues, Kirk and Jillian from DNR and from Jefferson County Conservation District. But mostly I'd like to thank you all for coming out, taking the time to actually spend a little bit of time learning about how our wildfire risk is changing here and helping do some of the things you can do around your home to help protect and prevent wildfire from impacting your home. Okay, so some of our goals today is we're going to talk about what the current wildfire risk update looks like for this year, how wildfire tends to spread, and that's important because that's going to help us make choices on how to prevent wildfire from impacting our homes. And again, we're going to talk about how to mitigate the wildfire from impacting your home. We're also going to talk about how you should respond if a wildfire is occurring in the area. That would be a good, important document. I'm going to provide you some resources, many of which are here at the vendor tables, as well as are available out to the public, because I want you to be able to get the information you need. Those of you who are familiar with QR codes, and get your phones ready, because at the end of this presentation there'll be a number of QR codes where you can get some pretty cool resources too. But mostly I want to be able to answer your questions today. So any questions that come up in the middle of the presentation, please raise your hand and we'll get them answered as we go. I want this to be a dialogue and conversation about this. I'm not a lecturer, I am a educator. Okay, so where are we with our current wildfire risk right now? Well, one of the latest projections is that we're currently in drought condition here. It may be a little bit hard to see on the screen, but our area of Jefferson County is in the yellow, which shows that we're already abnormally dry. So those of you who have seen the Olympic Mountains recently can tell that there's not a lot of snowpack in the mountains. So we are anticipating a rather dry summer and probably some sort of drought conditions and modifications in order to manage our water supply. But right now it's not necessarily looking good. The potential outlook, it's a little early to shoot too far forward. This is from May of 2026. This is for May of 2026. It doesn't really show any higher risk in Washington State. But as we move into the June projection, the eastern half of the state, surprisingly enough, is looking like there's going to be more of a risk. And as we move into July's forecast, you can see that creeps towards us farther. These projections are updated every month, so I'm anticipating next month we're going to see some more projections, particularly in August, which will show things a little bit differently. But right now, we don't know 100%. I would just say let's prepare for it to be dry and be a bad wildfire season. Now, wildfire itself is a natural occurring event in the environment. As we've moved into these wonderful wooded areas, we are now part of that natural occurring event. So what we're trying to do is prevent those wildfires, if they happen, from becoming structure fires, and that's certainly important. So the way wildfires are impacted are what kind of fuel load is present. And the fuel load is really that wooded material that's in the forest as it accumulates and grows. Over the years, we've got a much thicker growth in the forest areas, so that creates more fuel for these wildfires. The air temperature, which as you may notice is getting warmer on average, certainly impacts that fire and the likelihood of fire because it dries out the fuels a lot quicker. Because the relative humidity in the air is very significant. That humidity makes its way into the plants themselves And however moist and damp those plants are, the more likely they are to ignite when exposed to heat. As they get drier, they're more likely to ignite and spread wildfire. In the winter, if a small fire was to start, it's not going to go very far because all those plants are so wet that they're not really going to be prone to ignition. Now, the wind speed and direction of the wind is one of the critical factors because that's going to really drive how that heat moves, how those airborne embers move, and which direction they're going to go. So we're in a lovely area here right by the water. If a wildfire was on the other side of the water, depending upon the wind speed, it may or may not impact this side of the water. So we need to be aware that wind is certainly very significant. However, the fire tends to start is also important too. The ignition source. Any guesses off the top of your head, and those who have heard this presentation are exempt from guessing, but what percentage of wildfires do we think are naturally caused? Do we think it's about 50%? Anybody? 25%? 15% of wildfires are caused by natural causes. That means 85% of wildfires have a human source ignition. So we want to be aware of that as we get into this. So how do wildfires grow? Well, we kind of touched on it a little bit. The wind is significant, and those airborne embers, those little pieces of burning material, can travel quite a distance. They can travel 50 yards, 100 yards, or even miles if the wind is sufficient enough. And as those embers land somewhere farther upwind, or downwind, then they have an opportunity to ignite materials in that area. And that's one of our big factors that we can do to reduce that risk. They also spread by that slow-moving ground fire running through meadow grasses, running along bark mulch or duff in a forest area. Those are not as significant as rapid as the airborne embers, but it's certainly something to be aware of. Now, another way that they really can spread is when that fire doesn't just move horizontally, but it moves vertically. And it gets into the upper trees, especially the evergreen trees. When it gets into the crowns of the trees, it can burn very hot and very fast, creating enough radiant heat that can ignite other vegetation beside it and certainly other structures beside it. So we have some steps we're going to recommend today to reduce the risk of that fire moving up into the trees. Nearby structures also can create enough radiant heat if they're burning and ignite your particular structure. And the reason I bring that up is because while you can spend all your effort and energy making sure that your home is prepared for wildfire, if your neighbor does not do the same and their house catches fire, it can create enough radiant heat to ignite your home. That's not to put fear in yours, but just to recognize that working together as a neighborhood is really, really important for protecting your homes and your families. So I, again, applaud the neighborhood approach to this, really working together so that everyone is doing something for this. Because again, our goal is to prevent that wildfire from becoming a structure fire. This is Hawaii. This was, I call it the miracle house or some other term like that. But this is a house that survived because some of these precautions were taken to create a defensible space. They did two things. One is they hardened their home, and we'll talk about what that means. But basically, the outer shell of your home is in a non-combustible form. They prevented accumulation of combustible materials around the perimeter of the home. Again, thinking those airborne embers. We don't want them to land and find something they can ignite, which will then ignite the home. And they're preventing those airborne embers from entering into the house, particularly into the crawl space, soffit vents in the attic space, gable vents, and we'll talk about some of the ways that that can happen. The other element is they created defensible space around their home. And think about those zones of a perimeter of about 5 feet around your house. That first 5 feet is the biggest bang for your buck. If you have any opportunity to work on your home and you can do that in the first 5 feet, you will gain the biggest benefit. But as you move out away from that 5 feet, that 5 to 30 foot range, there are some other things you can do to reduce the risk of wildfire impacting your home. And particularly it's eliminating those ladder fuels. And we'll talk about this in a second. But again, the ladder fuels are those fuels that help that flame move from the ground up into the crowns of the trees. Okay. So let's talk about home hardening. Most homes themselves are constructed with relatively non-combustible materials. In your roofing, you've got asphalt composition shingles, as you see in the picture, or metal roofs, or you may even have concrete or clay tile roofs. If you have wood shakes or shingles, those are combustible, whereas the first three sets are not. And that's important to know because if that ember lands on your roof, and you've got asphalt shingles or a metal roof or concrete tiles, they're not going to be able to ignite that material. However, if you've got wood shakes or shingles, there is a potential for that to ignite. I am not telling you right now you need to go home and immediately pull off all those wood shakes and shingles, but I just want you to be aware that when it's time for re-roofing, probably consider something that's not combustible if you have your choice. When it comes to the gutters, that's also important. Most people have metal gutters. Great, those are non-combustible. If you have vinyl gutters, with enough heat, those will melt and burn. The thing that's important about gutters is that that ember comes and lands on the roof, and it's going to go out. But if it lands on the roof and it finds vegetation accumulation, leafy debris, all that stuff that gets blown around in the wind, it could ignite that material. It's not going to necessarily ignite the shingles. But that same ember landing in the gutter and finding debris, leafy debris, pine needles, and those things, it can ignite that, but it's got a direct path to the underside of the roof where wood sheathing or OSB sheathing is in place, and now you've got possible ignition of the roof itself. So your gutters are very important. If you've got vinyl gutters right now, don't go rip them all down, but when it's time for replacement, consider something non-combustible. Your exterior siding is also a factor too. A lot of people have wood siding, whether it's lap, panel, or shingle siding. That's okay, because generally that ember is not necessarily going to land on a vertical surface, but just be aware that any heat in the area certainly could create enough of an ignition there. However, if you've got hardy plank or composite cement siding, that is non-combustible, and that's a good way to go. So again, don't pull off all your wood siding and put on hardy plank at this point, but if you have an opportunity to change that in the future, you'd want to go something non-combustible. Metal siding, which certainly exists in the area, is another option too for being non-combustible. Now, you also have decks. All decks are made of wood. Even if you've got that composite Trex decking material on the top, the main structure of it is wood, also usually pressure treated wood. And we're going to talk about some ways that we want to prevent those decks from igniting, particularly by preventing any kind of accumulation of combustible materials under the deck. And I know I've seen quite a number of decks that everyone's got their firewood, their lawn furniture, a bunch of spare lumber, all that stored underneath your decks. Well, that's also areas where the leafy debris and twigs and branches are all getting blown, so we want to eliminate that. Now, as a guy, I can tell you, I know that some gentlemen in here probably have some stacks of wood that they think they're going to use for that project someday. You're not going to use it. Get rid of it. You're welcome, ladies. Okay. So we really want to reduce the amount of combustible storage underneath the deck itself. Now, we talked about venting. This is where we see those airborne embers coming into soffit vents, gable vents, roof vents, ridge vents. A lot of times those will come with screening under the design to keep animals out. And the openings in that screening is 1/4 inch. Well, an ember can easily find its way into there and get into the attic, and there's where all the Christmas ornaments are on the insulation. That is stuff that we want to avoid. So screening these vents with 1/8 of an inch or smaller material is the recommendation. I've got one sample here, and I've got some more over the table of a type of product that is recommended. This is a fire-resistant screening. This one's 1/16 of an inch, if you can even see it. It's rigid, it's fireproof, and it's a good product for covering up those kind of vents itself. And to play along with the whole of the cobbler whose kids have no shoes, I have a roll of this sitting in my garage for the last 6 months. I haven't had a chance to put it up yet either. I understand, but at least I'm working my way in that direction. And you're going to want to put that on soffit vents, gable vents, roof vents. Your crawl space vents too are the other area. In fact, my own admission, these pictures are all from my house, so I've definitely shown you the reality. I've got these kind of crawl space vents where I'm, again, taking this roll of material, I'm gonna be able to cover up those crawl space vents too. So we don't wanna allow any of those embers to come into the crawl space, because in your crawl space, you either have storage, or if it's clean enough, you've got some plastic paper barrier down on the floor there. And yes, that is ignitable, and it's right underneath your floor, so we don't want to see it. The thing about airborne embers is so significant, and it actually took me a while to kind of realize this. It's not just the ember itself that is landing near your house. Wherever the wind is blowing that leafy material, it's going to blow that ember. So now we've got an accumulation of leafy material and an ember. And just on its own, you wouldn't think that would do a lot. Remember that wind is blowing so hard during those events. You think about if you're trying to stoke a fire and you blow it with bellows or even with your mouth or whatever, it gets pretty hot. So even a small ember in a leafy area or accumulation in anywhere around the house or into the crawl space is going to have enough energy to really create quite a bit of heat. Now, we talked about decks, below decks. If you've got a deck that's more than 24 inches above the ground, I would see if you can find a family member or a neighborhood kid who's small enough to crawl under there and pull out all that leafy material on a regular basis. Or if you can get under there, great, especially if you can walk under there, even better. But if it's less than 24 inches, you're not going to be able to get under there very often. And again, this screening material is something you can put around the face of that deck, and it'll keep the embers out, it'll keep the leafy debris out, it'll keep all those animals out too. So it's a good way to kind of go. So our big key on airborne embers is to eliminate that combustible leafy debris that's on the roof, in the gutters, and around the base perimeter of your house. I just cleaned up my gutters this last weekend for the third time for the year. So it's something that you're not doing once a year or even twice a year. It's as you need to based on what's around your house. You want to eliminate any of that combustible storage materials around the outside, furniture, firewood, lumber, garbage, and any leafy debris. Add some mesh screening to those soffit vents on your decks, especially if those screens that are existing are a quarter-inch or more. And clear all that debris and other storage items out from underneath your deck and elementary. All right, these are some big steps you can do. If you walk away from this event with just a few things in mind that you can work on this weekend, this is your list right here. And talk to Gary. I understand that there's some dumpsters that will be in some of the neighborhoods or some of the areas. It's a great opportunity this weekend to do some of this work. All right. If that fire is moving slowly across the grass and ground, we just want to kind of be aware that that can create an issue too. So in your yard, I'm recommending you keep your grasses trimmed and particularly close to the structures, the closer you get in that first 5 feet ideally. But keep them watered as much as you can. Now I know that's sort of contrary to the thought of being in a drought, but I'm going to let you find that balance. But we want to try and keep them watered as much as we can. There we go. Keep grasses, shrubs, and trees watered. And trimming the shrubs to create separation from the ground. I am not the kind of person who's going to stand here and tell you you need everything within 5 feet of your house removed that's combustible. I am not telling you to cut down trees. I'm asking you to trim them up to create separation between the ground and between your home. So from the ground, if you can trim it up just a couple of inches just to create separation, particularly if you've got bark mulch under there. We want to reduce the risk of that bark mulch igniting and translating that heat into the brush itself. Between the shrub and the house, I'm going to recommend about a shoulder's width of separation because I would like you to be able to A, walk there between the brush and the house so you can keep it clear, but also if that brush was to ignite, it reduces the risk of transferring to the house. I also want to have you trim it down, and the reason I want that down to about 5 or 6 feet, because if that brush does ignite, I don't want that heat and flames going up into your attic underneath your eaves. So a little bit of trimming of that is good. Notice we're not removing the shrub, but we are trimming it to manage it in a better way. Anybody hostile with any of that yet? Yes, comment. Now, that concept of preventing fires from moving up into the crowns of the trees, we want to eliminate what we call ladder fuels. Again, we've got an airborne ember that has landed in some bark mulch, and it finds a low shrub at night. Well, if I've got enough proximity to the shrub or tree above that, that fire is going to continue up into the crown. So we're going to create a little bit of a break. If I've got a 3-foot shrub and I've got trees that are above it and I want to keep both of them, if I want to take twice the height of that shrub and create that clearance above it from branches, that should be sufficient. So a 3-foot shrub, if I can clear 6 feet above that shrub and branches, it's going to reduce the risk of that flame actually translating into the tree above it. I can also trim that shrub down if I don't want to take any of those low branches, whatever, just to create that separation there. You're basically creating a little fire break so we don't have an immediate step right up into the crowns of the trees. You're removing rungs of the ladder, basically. If you have trees freestanding and wide enough road, and you finish this one point, I'll get your question. If you can trim them up about 5 to 10 feet above the ground, you're going to gain a lot of benefit there. So that's really not removal of trees as much as just creating a separation from the ground and the branches above. Yes, sir.
I was just wondering when you talk about embers that are confined to their, what would be the likelihood that they would hit the lower stuff and not the upper? When they just be all over the place?
They can be all over the place, but there's probably a real good chance that they're going to land on the ground and be there long enough to do something. Yes, they certainly could land in the dry branches and create an ignition too, but probably more likely they're going to end up landing on the ground and igniting there.
So Robert, what was the question?
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, fair enough, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
He asked me, those airborne embers, is there a likelihood that they're gonna land above the ground or in the tree branches versus on the ground and ignite the trees anyways? And while that's possible, just probably more likely that the ones that land on the ground will have enough time to ignite something. And I'm sorry about that, I will remember to repeat the question next time. And again, like we talked about before, we want to definitely trim those shrubs at the ground so that below the branches to make sure we've got some separation there. All right, our second concept is that defensible space. Now, I mentioned before that first 5 feet around is the biggest bang for your buck. That's the area to concentrate on. Eliminate collections of debris, eliminate combustible storage, and trim back some of those shrubs that you can, or trees in that area. That's called the immediate zone. That's 0 to 5 feet. As you move outside that zone, that 5 to 30 feet from the house, that's an area where you have a little different approach. We're not as much concerned about direct exposure to the house. We want to eliminate some of those ladder fuels, so trimming those spaces between shrubs and trees above them. If you find that you have the opportunity to remove some trees to create a little separation horizontally, that's an option too. I'm going to defer to my partner experts over there that are more in forest health to kind of help give you some guidance on that, but that's certainly something to pay attention to. And then as you move out from your house, that 30 to 100 feet, whether that hits a property line or not, it's still similar kind of recommendations on reducing those ladder fuels. Now, one area that we didn't really talk about too much in that 0 to 5 feet is definitely important, is if you've got pine bark mulch at the base of your house, that's a good opportunity to improve that too. If you can remove that back and actually put in non-combustible materials such as pea gravel or pavers or even concrete, that will reduce the risk of any kind of ember catching there too. Now, it's always very situational. If you don't have enough space or you want 5 feet of gravel and you can give me 2 or 3 feet, that's even better. If you've got a lot of, your house is built that you've got a lot of space of exposed foundation, concrete foundation, with some wood siding above it, but there's 3 feet of foundation exposed, I'm less concerned about that mulch, just because if that mulch was to ignite, it's not necessarily going to translate the heat to the wood siding. But it's very situational. So just in general terms, that first 5 feet, if you can reduce the pine bark mulch or minimize it as much as you can, is definitely a good recommendation. Okay, so let's get into some specific examples even further. In that immediate zone, that 0 to 5 feet, Again, remember, that's where the wind is depositing all that leaky debris. You want to clear all that debris as much as you can. Replace that bark mulch with gravel or something non-combustible. Keep grass trimmed, keep it watered. Trim those vegetation, those shrubs, like I said, up from the bottom, away from the house, down, away from the soffits. And trim any trees that are hanging over your roof line. I'd like to see about 10 feet of clearance between your roof line and the trees above it. So if you've got some trees that are overhanging, and you can cut those branches off, that are 10 feet, within 10 feet of the roof, that will reduce the risk of transferring heat, but it'll also help protect your roof because you're getting a little more exposure to the air and it won't create as much moss and growth. And again, cobbler shoes, this building is our administrative offices on Seaton Road. Now that intermediate zone, that 5 to 30 feet, that's really we want to eliminate those ladder fields, trim those low-hanging branches that are above the ground, trim shrubs below the tree, create twice the height of the shrub above it. And in this picture, you can clearly see that if there was an ember landing on the ground, it would easily move up into the trees above it. And yes, that's outside of our administrative offices. And yet again, outside of administrative offices, you can see in that 30 to 100 foot zone, I've got some branches that are hanging down low on the ground. That's a great area to cut those up 5 to 10 feet above the ground so we don't have them down low in contact. Some of the trees, I don't know which ones, but they start up high and then they have those low drooping branches that hang down. That's close proximity to the ground, so we need to cut those up. Yes, sir.
Cut the branches up how far?
The question is how far the branches? 5 to 10 feet is a good recommendation, but it is sort of specific to what you're comfortable with and what the tree really needs. But that's a good recommendation of 5 to 10 feet above the ground. Yes, sir.
So if you have low-hanging branches, the branch where it connects to the trunk on that tree, that comes down 5 feet, you actually need to trim up 10 or 15, 20 feet.
Yeah, correct. The question is about those, again, those low swooping branches. You do need to trim at the trunk even higher than that 5 to 10 feet to account for that low. Or you could cut that branch short a little bit so that it kind of springs back up. I am not an arborist, nor do I pretend to be. I am really good at destroying trees by over pruning. Yes, sir.
So you're talking about just where there are structures. So if you have this, and we're out in an area of a height, that's good and well and remain the way it is, correct?
Yes, her question is these kind of conditions, if they're not near structures, is it really as important? Yes, if it's closer to a structure, it's more important. But as you get farther away, less important. Well, that's kind of a balance on what you want to do with your property. Any kind of fire that occurs 100 feet away from your house certainly can propagate and continue closer to your house. So there is a good reason to take some of these steps farther away from the house. But again, my priority is that first 5 feet. So I think they're all important, but the priority is 5 feet. Okay. Yes?
Do you have any recommendations for how to protect wooden fences that may buffer up to your home?
So the question is about wood fences. And wood fences, the recommendation is that anything within 10 feet of your home, especially where it attaches to your home, should ideally be non-combustible. That's certainly a big task to ask, and I would say if you're planning to do any kind of fence replacement and you can replace it with something non-combustible, metal, aluminum, or something like that would be a good choice. In terms of protecting existing wood fences that are in close proximity, it's very much similar to some of the other things that where you want to trim any kind of grasses that are below them, trim shrubbery away from them. And even if you can put a line of gravel directly under the fence and bordered on either side of it, that would be a good way to go to kind of protect that fence. But any element of that fence with enough heat could actually ignite at one end and travel the entire to that fence. Yes, sir.
Is there any kind of a fire retardant that you could spray on the fences like that? Would help protect the wind from
The question about fire retardants you could place on a fence, which also can be placed on a wood-shaped roof
your house?
or a house. I understand that there are, There are some questions, I think, that have to do with how frequently you have to reapply that material. So if you're diligent about doing that on a regular basis, as the manufacturer recommends, as well as exposure to plants, pets, and children, I'm gonna let you kind of make that choice. I am personally not necessarily a big fan of them, but I understand that they're out there. So kind of recap what we've got. We've got two basic concepts: hardening the home by using non-combustible materials, and then defensible space, creating that spaces where any kind of airborne embers or fire are not necessarily going to translate to get closer to your structure. All right, so I gave this away earlier, but 85% of wildfires have a human cause to them. And that could be unintended campfires, yard debris burning, yard work using hot tools. So you've got a gas-powered engine and you set it down in the dry grass, that's going to be a bad thing. Driving any kind of vehicles over tall, dry grass, the muffler heat can ignite the grass. If anybody smokes, which looks like most people are starting to get away from that, which is great. If you happen to discard those cigarette butts in vegetation or bark mulch, there have been a number of structure fires that were caused by a cigarette thrown into a planter or bark mulch beside the house. If you do any towing, you want to make sure that those tow chains are nice and secure so we don't get a chain hitting the pavement as you're traveling, creating a little spark, as it caused a lot of roadside fires in the past. Those of you who have fireplaces or wood stoves, I'm a huge advocate of having those cleaned on a regular basis, especially if you're burning green wood. You want to make sure that the flue itself is nice and clean and that you've got a proper spark arrestor on the top of that chimney. And of course, the other ignition source is intentional ignition, and certainly that is a factor of being in a human society, but hopefully we try to reduce that as much as we can.
Robert, what about, those, weed burners? What perspective do you have on those?
Yeah, the question is about propane weed burners. Understand their function. I certainly understand some people like to use them. There is something kind of fun about really taking it to those weeds. Anyway, there are a couple things. Right now, they are allowed to be used. However, if you are going to use them, please be prepared. Pay attention to what you're doing. Be aware of the weather conditions. And if you can, have a hose or some sort of water or bucket or something that you have available nearby in case that flame tends to get away from you, and it can. So, I'm not a big fan of them. I understand why people use them, but definitely use care. Yes, sir.
Could you say a word about power lines and trees?
Power lines and trees, that is a tough question. That is also something that has caused a number of wildfires on the west side of the country. I don't want to get into that too much, but if you have trees that are contacting power lines on your property, I would recommend calling your electrical provider, whether that's PUD or someone else, and ask them to be trimmed. That includes not only the wires that are running from pole to pole, but also the service wires running from the pole to your service mast service on your house. Definitely pay attention to those. So that is not something I'm going to recommend a homeowner mess with. I would call your electrical provider if you see any kind of contact there. Yes, ma'am.
Can you address propane tanks in proximity to the house?
Okay, the question is proximity of the propane tanks to the house. In an ideal world, you've got about a 30-foot clearance between a propane tank and your house. We all have lots that big. Ideally, if your propane tank is right up next to the house, which most times it is, I'm going to recommend that you keep any vegetation accumulation away from that propane tank. That's a good area to blow out to make sure there's no leafy debris. Keep the grass low, keep shrubs trimmed away from it. If a flame was approaching that tank and created enough heat where it's actually going to cause the pressure relief valve on that tank to discharge, now you've got a potential for basically just a blowtorch. But just a low heat and not a long combustion is probably not going to impact that tank. So, ideal world, 30 feet away. If you don't have that opportunity, just keep the debris and any combustibles away from that tank and it'll help. Follow-up question.
Also, propane lines to grills on decks.
Okay, propane lines on grills on decks. So either that white flexible yellow tubing or even maybe rigid tubing. That is also something that you want to kind of maintain or keep it as clear of any kind of debris as possible. I think if there was a wildfire in the area and you had the opportunity to shut off the gas to that supply line, it's probably a good call. I'm not advocating necessarily shutting off gas to the entire house, but at least just to that local appliance is not a bad idea. But all these things, there's so many things in the house that are ignitable and combustible, and it would be irrational to think we can eliminate them all. What we can do is keep them clear of any other kind of debris that's going to ignite quickly. Yes, sir.
Do you recommend a fireproof tarp or blanket to cover a wood pile?
I do not have a recommendation for some. I do know that there are some out there that are fire resistant, not necessarily fireproof. And that may gain a little bit of a benefit. If embers were in the area, it might not be a bad idea if you have the opportunity to store wood piles farther away from the house. But certainly that's not always an option. But I'm sorry, I don't have a recommendation for it, fireproof like that on that. So let's talk about some of the ways that you can not be the source of that wildfire. Never leave your campfires unattended. Make sure they're extinguished fully. Pay attention when you're doing any kind of work or burning any debris. We'll talk about debris burning in just a second. Be aware of weather conditions. If the wind is picking up, or it's really warm or really dry, not a good time to be doing some of that work. Keep your grass watered and mowed. Discard the cigarette butts and sand in a covered container. Properly secure your tow chains. Have your chimney flue cleaned and inspected regularly. Sound like Bob Barker, if anybody knows the reference there. Now, also pay attention to the fire danger levels. Now, fire danger levels are something we started a couple of years ago, and it's important now, especially as we start into this fire season. Those fire danger levels are based on the conditions, both forecast and current, but also our available resources. And that is the decision that is made in conjunction with the 4 fire chiefs within the county and the county fire marshal's office. So this is not something that we just decide willy-nilly. This is based on actual data and information we're getting from the field and making sure that we're able to continue to provide service for you if we need it. Right now, we are in a low fire danger level. That means there's no restrictions. Out here in the county, you are able to build that fire, to do s'mores with the kids. You can burn land and yard debris. You can use your gas-fueled appliances, gas barbecue, gas flame table. You can even have the tiki torches and do the luau and have all sorts of fun. Now, when we go to a moderate level, that's when we outlaw yard debris burning or land clearing burning and those gas weed burners. So one thing I definitely want to talk about right now is, we'll go into this a little bit, but generally the county has an ordinance that says on July 1st, at least we will go to a moderate fire danger level. Last year we went on June 1st. It's weird today because it's a little drizzly, but based on the conditions, we are looking at probably going, if not early May, middle of May, or late May. We're going to be even earlier again this year. If you've got any kind of yard debris burning, get it done this weekend. Okay? Because when we go to moderate, those things are not allowed. Now, you still can do the s'mores with the grandkids. You can still use the gas barbecue, even the luau is still on. Because when we go to high, again, based on conditions and resources, that's when the s'mores campfire is out. You are not doing any kind of open flame or wood charcoal cooking. That means in an open pit or in a campfire base, no cooking there. No open torches, no liquid fuel candles, and no discharge of fireworks. That's at level high. And I see a lot of you have already thought about spending thousands of dollars on fireworks this year. So just keep that in mind. But at that level, you are still allowed to use your gas or propane fueled appliances. And you're still allowed to use that enclosed wood, pellet, or charcoal cooking that's in your Weber or some other device that is designed for containing those materials. Okay? If we go to very high, that's when things start going really bad. No more wood or charcoal cooking, but you can still use your gas or propane barbecue. The reason is because if something goes wrong, you can turn off that fuel quickly and you'll no longer have any fuel. Whereas if you're cooking barbecue or wood, it's harder to get that to cool down. So at very high, you can only use your gas barbecue. Because when things go to extreme, it's no fun for no one. So nothing gets to go on. Now I mentioned briefly that in previous years, we started the year at a low, and on July 1st, we raised a moderate, as the county ordinance says. July 10th, just 10 days later, we went to a high. 7 days later, we went to a very high. Now, we never went to an extreme that year, which is good. But it took until August 27th before we dropped that back down, before the conditions and the resources allowed for it. And it was another month, almost a month, before we lowered it back down to moderate, and then October 1st, we went to low. Reasonable. Last year, we started out low, but on June 1st, we went to moderate. June 25th, we went to high, and we stayed there until October 1st. And then it wasn't until 2 weeks later that we actually were able to drop it down below, because the conditions became more like Western Washington. What's it gonna be like this year? Like I just said, probably early next month, we'll be going to at least moderate, if not going up to a high. Because that's based on conditions, the drought, the reduced snowpack in the mountains, and all the fuel we have. I'm kind of a downer today, aren't I? All right, I definitely want to touch on what to do if a wildfire occurs, because we get a lot of questions based on this. If there are evacuations ordered due to a wildfire in the area, they're going to be really announced in 2 specific ways. Nixle alerts, which are those alerts you get on your phone or on KPTZ. Now, I understand, probably don't get KPTZ very well down here. I actually have a good friend of mine works there, and they're looking at trying to put a new transmitter, and I said, you should put it in Port Lotho. He was thinking like, we'll see. I'm like, no, Port Lotho. The Nixle alerts look much like this. A lot of times you'll see that they're actual road closures, but you have seen, maybe you've seen in previous fires done in Quilcene, there have been some announcements of evacuations. Those evacuations and where you are told to go is going to be dependent on the location of the event, where it's moving, and the condition of the evacuation routes. A lot of people want to say, if there's a fire, where do I go? I don't know. It depends on where those things are going. So you will get alerts and notifications through Nixle or through KPTZ to give you those recommendations. Those evacuation levels, basically 3 levels. Level 1, which stands for ready. Level 2, which stands for set. Level 3 stands for go. And they'll issue those based on those levels. Now, if it's level 1, that means there's a wildfire threat in the area. You should probably plan or pack a bag and be ready to go. And in the event that an evacuation becomes necessary, you should have a go bag ready. And that's another one of those questions. What should you have in your go bag? Whatever you need. So that's important. Now, whether that's water, food, a contact list, cash, prescription drugs, pet supplies, extra glasses, whatever things you think you're going to need from the home that you can throw in that bag, have it ready by your door. Also a good time to fill up the tank with gas. I know that's a little harder right now, but it's a good idea to do that. Or fully charge your car if it's an electric vehicle, and fully charge your cell phone so that you're all set to go in case that evacuation occurs. If it gets upgraded to a level 2, the set level, then there's a high probability you will need to evacuate. I always recommend that if you have mobility issues, you need extra time, pets, or you're concerned about other yahoos on the road, level 2 is a good time to go. Because when it goes to level 3, that's evacuate now. All the yahoos that are on the road, and the other yahoos are our crews who are actually blocking roads to fight the fire itself, so there will be road closures involved in that. You don't want to get involved in that situation. Level 3 is not a great time to go. Now, people want to say, well, what if I stay and I just fight the fire and protect my house? I understand that sentiment, but I want to let you know that if you get in trouble, our crews are busy, we're not going to be able to come help you. I'm going to implore you to evacuate when you are told to evacuate. Someone usually fights me at this point right now. But it really is important for your safety and for the safety of the area and the safety of our firefighters and the effective fighting of that fire. It's best if you have evacuated the area.
Robert?
Yes.
Can you say something about people who want to spray down their house before they evacuate?
Right, so the question is about spraying down your house before you leave. The wind and the rain are gonna dry that out in no time, and it's gonna be fruitless. If you're gonna apply some sort of flame retardant over the top of your house, maybe that'll be helpful, but then your house is all pink when you come back. But I really think it's best just to leave when you're told to evacuate. Now, this is where the cavalcade of QR codes comes in. And if you are not able to grab that QR code, please come see me at the table afterwards, but I'm happy to help you get set up with Nixle alerts. All you do is either, when you go to that QR code, the website, the little image on the right is how you can sign up, or you can even text a certain word to that particular number, but I'm happy to help you if you are not on Nixle. I'm seeing one phone still up, on another phone back up. We'll let that clear. Okay, good. If you really like to read about data about wildfires, you can certainly look at the Jefferson County Community Wildfire Protection Plan. This is a huge document that's got tons of information that you can learn about the risks specific to your neighborhood. I'll take a picture of that so I know that it's helpful there. Okay, now, one of the things that we started last year in partnership with great gratitude to the Washington State Department of Natural Resources is we are doing home wildfire assessments. All these recommendations I'm making right
There are meadows, grass and stuff, and various things on the ground. And there's still a lot of things on the ground, and now it's really dry. And there's also a lot of dry things along the edge of the road that never get stopped. I'm more concerned about that. Anyway, that's just me.
Fair point. Gentleman in the back, please.
I'm a disaster preparedness person, and I only keep 15 extra gallons of gasoline in my shed, which the only place for that is under my deck. Do I take the gasoline with me when I evacuate early?
That's a great point. Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. I think my first inclination is evacuate as soon as you possibly can. Secondly, you seem to be minimizing the fuel that's there. The shed's only under the deck. Well, I prefer it to be somewhere else. You are allowed to store small quantities of gasoline in your garage, which is probably a little bit safer than in a shed. And I always recommend you can store that on a shelf.
Garage is under the house.
Pardon me?
Garage is under the house.
The garage is under the house, okay. And you said you stored the gasoline in a shed under the deck.
Yes.
Okay. Well, you could store it in the garage if you needed to. For sure. Yeah. Okay.
All right.
Well, I think what we'll do now is we'll open up the tables, and please feel free to speak with any of the experts we have here today, and you may have some specific questions relating to your house and or your landscaping, and we've got people here to help you with that. So thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it.